There was this one weekend when my aunt, uncle, and cousins went on a trip upstate. Instead of taking their dog with them or boarding her at a kennel, they asked me to watch her for the weekend at their house. I was more than happy to do it, not only because they offered to pay me, but because their house is incredible, filled with all sorts of fun things to do. Their dog, a small Havanese named Bella, was also very easygoing and low maintenance, so it seemed like the perfect setup. Bella was a calm, sweet dog who didn't require much attention, just feeding twice a day and a few trips outside. She had this habit of following me wherever I went, always wanting to be near me. Whether I was lounging in the giant living room watching TV or heading downstairs to play video games in the basement, Bella would trot along and settle down near me, content to just be close. That evening, I was in the basement, engrossed in a video game, when Bella suddenly lifted her head and stared in the direction of the boiler room. I'd had dogs before, so I knew this was something they often did in response to the slightest sound. Still, it was enough to make me pause the game and feel a bit uneasy. The boiler room was silent and dark, and the thought of going in there made me uncomfortable, so I quickly dismissed the idea and resumed playing, although I was now a bit on edge. Bella eventually relaxed and put her head back down, but not for long. A few minutes later, she lifted her head again, staring at the boiler room with more intensity. My unease grew, but I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was probably nothing. Despite my efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched or that something was just off. The basement suddenly felt a lot less inviting, so I decided to turn everything off and head upstairs, shutting the door behind Bella and me. Upstairs, I found another gaming room on the main floor. It was a bit isolated from the rest of the house, accessible only through a narrow hallway. Bella followed me, as usual, plopping herself down at my feet as I settled in to play more video games. The house was so quiet that the only sounds were the clicks of the controller and the faint hum of the HVAC system. Time passed quickly, and before I knew it, it was getting late. I decided to call it a night and made my way down the hall to the guest bedroom where I'd be sleeping. The room was nicer than my own bedroom back home, with a comfortable bed and a large TV mounted on the wall. I changed into sweatpants and a shirt and climbed into bed, not ready to sleep just yet, so I turned on the TV. Bella curled up beside the bed, her presence comforting in the otherwise silent house. As I watched TV, I couldn't help but think about how strange it was that she had been so fixated on the boiler room earlier. I'd eventually turned off the TV and drifted off to sleep, the warmth of the blankets and the steady breathing of Bella lulling me into a deep slumber. But my sleep didn't last long. I was jolted awake by a low growling sound coming from Bella. I turned on the bedside lamp, squinting in the sudden light, and saw her lying still on the floor, her head down but growling softly. My heart began to race as I called her name, but she didn't respond. Instead, she lifted her head and stared intently at the closet door. The growling grew louder, more intense as she stood up, still fixated on the closet. My pulse quickened, and I felt a cold sweat forming on my forehead. I followed her gaze to the closet. A sliding wooden door that was slightly ajar opened about 3 inches. The gap was just wide enough for me to see darkness inside, but nothing more. Fear gripped me as I slowly got out of bed, tiptoeing closer to the closet. I had no idea what I was planning to do, but I felt compelled to check. As I moved closer, something came into view through the crack in the door, something that hadn't been visible from my bed. My breath caught in my throat as I realized I was looking at an eye, a human eye, perfectly positioned between the wall and the edge of the door, staring straight at me. I screamed, a loud, panicked cry that echoed through the empty house. The sound of my own voice did little to calm me, and I immediately grabbed Bella and ran for the front door. My hands shook as I fumbled with the lock, finally managing to get it open. I bolted outside, clutching Bella and the emergency cell phone that was on the counter, and called 911 as I sprinted down the driveway. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, and the last thing I wanted to do was call my aunt and uncle, so I focused on getting help from the police. They arrived quickly and did a thorough sweep of the house. After what felt like an eternity, an officer emerged and informed me that they had found someone hiding in the pantry closet downstairs. I never saw the person. Another officer kept me occupied, trying to calm me down. But the thought of what could have happened if Bella hadn't alerted me still haunts me. That night, Bella may have saved my life. I'll never forget the sight of that eye staring at me from the darkness of the closet, or the fear that coursed through me as I realized I wasn't alone in that house. It was a cold December night in the Vermont countryside, and I was home alone, doing a favor for a friend by watching his dog, Max. Even though the temperatures were brutally low, I couldn't let Max out of the yard because there were no fences, and he could easily run off into the woods and get lost. That meant I had to brave the freezing cold to take him for a walk. Max was a large, energetic dog, and as soon as I clipped the old, worn blue leash onto his collar, he was ready to go. He pulled me toward the front door with such enthusiasm that I knew the walk was going to be a challenge. Stepping out into the biting cold was a shock to my system, and all I wanted was to get through the walk as quickly as possible. To warm up, I decided to run a little with Max, hoping to tire him out quickly. We made our way down the dirt road, surrounded by tall trees that seemed to close in on us as the night grew darker. Max stopped to sniff one of the many trees, and I thought he was about to do his business, but then he suddenly perked up and stared into the woods. A low growl rumbled in his throat before he erupted into loud, booming barks that echoed through the trees. Before I could react, Max yanked on the leash, trying to pull me into the woods. I struggled to hold him back, but the old leash snapped at a weak point, and Max bolted into the darkness, his barking growing fainter as he disappeared among the trees. Panic set in as I called his name, chasing after him without a second thought. The only light I had was from my phone, and it barely illuminated the path in front of me. The woods were dense, and with Max's barking now distant, I knew I had little chance of finding him on my own. I stopped running and stood still, calling his name over and over, hoping he would come back to me. As I called out, I heard footsteps nearby, heavy, deliberate footsteps that were much too loud to be Max's. My heart raced as I realized these were human footsteps, not the sound of a dog running through the woods. I quickly turned off my phone's light, fear gripping me as I tried to figure out what to do. The footsteps seemed to be circling me, moving slowly, almost as if whoever was out there was trying to decide what to do next. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and my only thought was to get back to the road as quickly as possible. I began tiptoeing away, trying to move quietly, but my fear made it difficult to stay calm. The footsteps stopped, or maybe they moved farther away. I wasn't sure. My pace quickened as I made my way back to the road, the trees casting long shadows in the dim light. I thought I was safe, that I had put enough distance between myself and whoever was out there. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. It was a dark figure, standing with its back to me, only a few feet away. My heart nearly stopped as I realized I had walked right up to someone, or rather something. The figure didn't move, didn't react to my presence, but I knew it wasn't Max. The figure was too tall, too still. I took a shaky breath and asked, "Have you seen my dog?" My voice was barely a whisper, but the figure didn't respond, didn't even turn around. It was wearing a hood, and in the darkness, I couldn't make out any features. Desperation took over, and I reached out to tap the figure's shoulder, hoping for some kind of response. But when my hand touched the shoulder, it didn't feel like flesh. It was hard, like wood. I quickly moved in front of the figure, shining my phone's light on it, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't a person at all. It was a crude dummy, dressed in old clothes, with a stick propping up the hood. That meant the footsteps I had heard, the footsteps that had circled me, weren't coming from this dummy. Whoever or whatever had made those sounds was still out there, hidden in the darkness. I didn't wait to find out who it was. I ran, not caring about the noise I made, and sprinted back to the road and up the hill to the house. Max never returned that night, and I never went back into those woods to look for him. Telling my friend what had happened was the hardest part. He was devastated and angry, and I couldn't blame him. We weren't close friends to begin with, and this incident drove an even bigger wedge between us. That night, I had a nightmare that I could hear Max barking in the woods, his barks turning into scared whimpers. I woke up in a cold sweat, looking out the window into the dark woods, hoping against hope that I would hear him, but the night was silent. I don't know what happened to Max, or what that dummy was doing in the woods, or who was making those footsteps. And frankly, I'm not sure I want to know. If you've made it this far, you're 100% a horror fanatic and we approve. If you love our campfire-themed horror storytelling experience, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on our daily uploads. One night, I was watching my neighbor's dog for some extra cash. The neighbor, Mrs. Jennings, was an older woman with a bit of an antisocial vibe. She wasn't creepy on purpose, but there was something about her that always made me a little uneasy. She was obsessed with her dog, a small, white, fluffy thing named Oliver. When she told me she'd be visiting family across the state and couldn't bring Oliver, she practically begged me to take care of him. I agreed, but only for a good price. Mrs. Jennings was very particular about how Oliver should be cared for. She scolded me with a long list of do's and don'ts, making it clear that this wasn't just a favor, it was a serious responsibility. She insisted I stay at her house rather than taking Oliver to mine, and she showed me to a spare bedroom with a single twin-sized bed and a desk in the corner. That was all that was in the room. Oliver was small, yappy, and annoying, definitely not my favorite kind of dog. He barked at every little thing, and I could tell it was going to be a long night. I started watching him around 5 p.m. and spent most of the evening playing games on my phone while trying to ignore his constant yapping. I only had to feed him once, which was a relief, but the thought of spending the night in that old, creaky house was not appealing. I brought my Xbox over, hoping to pass the time playing games on her TV, but I quickly realized that the TV was so outdated it didn't even have an HDMI port. Frustrated, I resigned myself to playing games on my phone and listening to Oliver's incessant barking. As the night wore on, I couldn't help but do a little snooping. Mrs. Jennings had left her bedroom door open, despite telling me not to go in there, so naturally, I took a peek. The room was filled with old, outdated furniture, and in the center was a large rectangular rug with a strange pattern that looked like something out of a different era. When it finally got late, I decided to go to bed around 9 p.m., eager to put the night behind me. I assumed Oliver would sleep in Mrs. Jennings' room, and I didn't care as long as he wasn't barking. I drifted off to sleep, hoping to make it through the night without any issues. But I was woken up in the middle of the night by the sound of Oliver's barking. It was loud, frantic, and seemed to be coming from somewhere deep in the house. Groggy and irritated, I yelled for him to be quiet, but the barking didn't stop. It sounded muffled, as if it was coming from a basement or some hidden part of the house I wasn't aware of. Confused, I got out of bed and followed the sound. The barking was coming from Mrs. Jennings' bedroom. As I walked inside, I noticed that the large rug in the center of the room had been rolled up and pushed to the corner, revealing a door in the floor, a door that was now open. The barking was coming from down there, from the darkness below. My heart started pounding as I realized that Oliver hadn't opened that door on his own. Someone or something had, and Oliver was barking at whatever it was. I hesitated, fear gripping me as I stood at the edge of the dark opening. I didn't want to shine a light down there, afraid of what I might see. Part of me wanted to leave the house and run home, but I couldn't just abandon Oliver down there. I whispered his name, and the barking suddenly stopped. The silence was deafening as I stood there, waiting for Oliver to come running up the stairs, but he didn't. Instead, something else emerged from the darkness, a hand. It reached up and grabbed the side of the opening, the hand of a man. I was faced with a choice, fight or flight. Being the 15-year-old kid I was, I chose flight. I bolted from the room, down the hall, and out the front door, not stopping until I was safe at home. I woke my parents, screaming about what had happened, and my dad immediately called the police to report a break-in next door. When the police arrived, they checked Mrs. Jennings' bedroom, just as I had described. The rug had been placed back in its original position, and the door was shut tight. They opened it to find a large crawl space with all sorts of strange things inside. Old furniture, dusty boxes, and other odd items. But there was no sign of a person, and no sign of Oliver. When Mrs. Jennings returned home the next day, my dad confronted her for me. She threw a fit, ranting about how the demons under her house made noises at night, and then broke down in tears over Oliver. Since that day, We haven't spoken to her. She rarely leaves her house, and that's fine by me. Even now, the thought of that night sends chills down my spine. I don't know what was really down in that crawl space, and I'm not sure I want to know. All I know is that I'll never forget the terror of seeing that hand emerge from the darkness, or the helplessness I felt as I ran for my life.